So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Tipsy Testing. This is Inflectra's weekly virtual happy hour. And this one is our 8th happy hour, Tipsy Testing. And we are chatting, as usual, about software testing, performance testing, automation. In this segment, we will talk about some AI, blockchain, as well as software engineering. And as usual, we talk about life in general. My name is Taya, and I'm the head of business development here at Inflectra. I will be moderating today's session. Now, let's meet our guests. So the first, or the only guest really, is he is an independent performance engineering and software testing consultant with over 25 years of experience. In his long career, he's worked for such giants as Microsoft, Hewlett-Packard, as well as PayPal. And now he's a free agent and spends time coaching, training, consulting clients on different ways of adopting testing and engineering strategies to improve their performance testing. He is into grid computing, and he likes to crunch numbers for science. Most visibly and notably, he's also an avid podcast producer. And he's the brain and soul behind the performance podcast called PerfBytes. We will talk about this a little later, but please welcome a man of many talents, Mark Tomlinson. Thank you, Mark, for being with us today.
Yeah, it's happy to be here, Ted. Great to see you, Adam.
Hello.
Awesome.
Hello.
Your eighth virtual happy hour tipsy test. I like the tipsy testing.
Tipsy testing, yeah.
Hashtag so cheers to you guys. They're very nice.
Oh, cheers. Cheers. There we go. Now, I know that there are some talents that I did not mention specifically, so I would like for you, Mark, to tell us a few more things about yourself that our viewers would be interested in hearing.
Well, I have an addiction to buying guitars. There's a bunch over here. There's another one there. There's one on the table over there, and then there's a bunch behind me. So I am a secret musician guitarist. No longer a secret. It's all exposed right here.
Yes,
forever.
No longer a secret.
Any video chat or any webinar session has this behind me, which is just, you're in the attic of my house, by the way. I live north of Philadelphia in a small, really interesting neighborhood called Elkins Park. And it's the home of what used to be the Elkins Estate and the Tyler School of Art that was connected to Temple University. And so as such, the former owners, not only of this, our house was made in 1864. And as you go down the street, there's 1850, 1830, 1820, 1700. Wow. So there are colonial homes, as old as our country here that are right around the street. But all of these art teachers were at the estate up the road where all the faculty and they all lived around here and raised their families. So we have this great old house that I live in. And then attached to the back of the house are these two enormous art studios. And so we'll have one, I'm converting one into a music studio, except everything's up here in the attic right now. And then my wife is an artist, so she does all the art making in there. So it's a giant house for now 2 people and 2 dogs. Exactly.
Well, you know what? It's better than smaller house. Giant house. During the pandemic, when you're in lockdown, it's better to have some options.
We have some employees who have like a tiny house with like 6 kids and boyfriends and girlfriends, and they're like slowly going insane.
Yeah, you can get some space. I feel incredibly privileged, very lucky indeed. But we do use the space. I mean, like I'm sitting in what is the equivalent of a mastering studio. You can't quite see it. There's a whole drum kit sitting over here. There's a bunch of guitar amps. On the other side, there's an exercise room, and that's just the attic. And then you've got, 4 bedrooms and then 2 art studios plus a movie theater. Not really a movie theater. It's just.
Did you go all Peloton during the crisis?
I didn't. I just have the little trainer.
Okay.
Just the cycling, the stand, I guess, the rear wheel. You put a stand on it.
Yep.
And it works pretty good. Actually, around here, we're still in kind of an urban area of Philadelphia. So there's it's like really busy. So anytime you go out to go bicycling or doing anything, the trails are really, really pretty jammed. But the nice thing is there's no traffic. Like there's a lot less traffic. So just bicycling on the streets is quite nice. It's still, you could get killed though, because it's Philadelphia. People drive like nuts around here. Yeah.
All right.
Exactly.
All right, then. So I'd like to take this moment and try to introduce our host. Not so much, guest speaker, but host, Adam Sandman. And you may know Adam from our previous Tipsy testing videos, but for those who are joining us for the first time, Adam is the director of technology at Inflectra. He's been working in IT for about maybe more than 20 years now, and he's interested in...
Feels like it. Feels like it, Tara.
I know, right? Agile development, software testing, test automation, project management, and so on and so forth.
So what is exactly what it feels like? Sorry, carry on.
He actually has a degree in physics, but I doubt he spent an hour in that field. But you can correct me, Adam, if I'm wrong.
Physics. It's a great scene with David Tennant in Doctor Who, where he goes, physics. That's all I've done. No, I used to write code when I was 8, and I guess I was a programmer in denial. I thought, I'll do a science degree, I'll become a scientist, and then I get to university. It's like, oh my, something is boring. I don't want to be in a lab forever. I like computers, technology, internet. This is amazing. I mean, in the 90s, like it was the beginning of technology and the internet. It was the birthplace. So it was too exciting to go into computers, and I came to America, did computer stuff, and the only physics I do is my kids, AP physics homework and stuff, or help them with that. That's about it.
Cool.
Adam is actually a prolific speaker with speaking engagements in the US as well as abroad for large and small tech conferences. And if you would like to catch his talks, he will be speaking at Agile plus DevOps in June, as well as Star West in October 2020.
Yeah.
So
and Eurostar as well, which was going to be in Antwerp in the zoo, but it got virtualized.
Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. Yes. So Eurostar 2020. November, early November.
Right.
Yes.
But I haven't got to do it in Flemish, luckily. That would be bad.
Adam and I were looking forward to going to Belgium to, be there, but maybe next time. Welcome, Adam.
I'm a Belgium fan. For sure.
If you want to add anything to my introduction of you, please feel free to do it now.
We have to have a fun fact. So my fun fact today, I'm running short. I'm scraping the barrel of fun facts. But one fun fact was, when I was a kid, I loved science fiction, and I thought it would be so cool to learn how to be like Mr. Spock and raise one eyebrow. So I can do that. Oh. And I did that. I spent probably about a month just in the mirror practicing, getting it. And I go, it's great. And then when I had my awards, I finished high school, I'm on the stage in front of the entire high school, and my mother's so proud. Oh, my son is going to go to college, and it's so exciting. And I'm like, hey, my parents are down there. I could signal to them. So I start using my eyebrows to signal to them in code. Hey, mom. Hey, dad. And my neighbor's like, Sandra, Howard, why is your son's eyebrows look like two caterpillars fighting? They weren't so proud. They're like, what the hell were you doing?
Funny. That is funny. That's very funny.
Fun fact.
That's just a little odd.
I'm an odd kind of person.
That's your true geek. A true geek from the heart. Yes.
I think so. I think he's truly a geek in his, deep in his heart.
But now geeks are cool. It's so much better.
Yeah. Geeks are now really, really cool.
I don't get punched in the face anymore like in school.
Oh, yeah. We condemn bullies.
No, we can. Now we can afford security. That's the difference.
Oh.
Yeah, I guess. All right. Now, before we get into the questions that we received from the internet sphere in general, I just wanted to check in with you guys just to see how you're doing. If you have any plans for Memorial Day, what you're drinking, anything that you want to say outside of the very strict question and answer section, this is your time. I'm drinking rum and coke. My poison today is Kraken black spiced rum with some coke.
Kraken? Can you hold the? Can you?
Yeah,
we probably
we
don't have permission to show the bottle of 94 proof, and the Kraken is the. I was saying that's an actual look like an octopus, but it's a Kraken.
Yeah, it is the mythical Kraken.
All right.
Yes, it is.
That as well.
Cheers.
I'm having cheers. I'm having a don't let someone drink alone there. This is a kind of a nice crisp Chardonnay, not too fruity. And I think it's from Lodi, California. Where I don't even know where is Lodi, California.
Oh, I lived in California for a year and a half. My wife's from California, so she would know.
Yeah.
I know there's
And that's what Google is for.
Yeah, so nowhere in Napa, but
That's right.
Lodi's another big area. There's a lot of Zinfandels in Lodi. I
Mm-hmm.
don't usually get Chardonnays from there, but certainly
Really?
they're very good in the Zinfandel category. A lot of them.
It's not Central Coast. Lodi Lake and Lodi City in California.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea. I'm looking it up there because, well, of course, it automatically opened it up in Waze.
Yes,
so it's
Waze, of course.
Probably gonna, yeah, of course. I'm gonna drive there right now.
3,000 miles, right? Go.
Yeah, exactly.
3,000 miles.
So yeah, lovely Chardonnay. But on my list, I never really got into rum and cokes.
Really?
Yeah, it was never. I don't know. I think because I didn't ever get into like having a lot of soda or pot, cola drinks or anything like that. And so I would just drink the rum straight on ice.
Yeah, I think my habit comes from beach parties, and I grew up on the beach, so yeah, you would have.
There you go. All right. What about a rum? Well, you could do just like a rum punch, and then you have like natural sugars instead of the processed cola.
Or a daiquiri where you could put a lime juice and a little bit of simple syrup.
Yeah,
Which is very good.
Yeah.
Or my favorite, which I did on the very first Tipsy testing, I did a Goomba Smash, which is, oh my goodness, it's a great drink from the bar that's in West Palm Beach area, and it's the bar that they filmed the movie or the song where it's 5 o'clock somewhere. That movie by Jimmy Buffett, that's filmed at the bar in West Palm Beach where we went, and then the drink they have, their sort of signature drink, is the Goomba Smash. It's basically a variation of a pina colada, but it has 3 kinds of rum: a Malibu, a spice rum like yours, a white rum like Bacardi, then the Malibu coconut rum, pineapple juice, apricot brandy, coconut cream syrupy stuff, and you mix it all up and you put some fruity slices, and that's an amazing drink, and it's good with rum.
That is insane.
It is a good drink. We had 2 of those, and
It's my mother-in-law. I am so sorry. She keeps calling.
No, it's fine.
Let me just text her to say
No, you could do it on the air. She could ask a question of us. We can answer.
Is she in Alaska right now?
Yeah, no, she's Bellingham in Washington.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there you go. All right.
Yeah.
Well, while you're doing that, I'll just say my drink today, which is almost all gone, so I'm down to the watery remnants, is a Rusty Nail, which is this was a Scotch whiskey, some Drambuie, and unfortunately I was out of lemon slices, so I had to riff it with a orange slice, but it's still citrus, so I think it's good.
I think the orange is better for a Rusty Nail because if you think about certain kinds of oxidation of rust is orange colored.
Right.
So I think a Rusty Nail goes with the color of the Drambuie, and so I think I would go for the orange.
And actually, if you do like an old fashioned, which is another on the rocks in an old fashioned glass, that would be an orange slice too. So actually, I think it's like an old fashioned flavor of a Rusty Nail. So I like it.
Or it's an old fashioned Rusty Nail.
It's right.
Yeah, in there.
In an old fashioned glass, which is what
in an old fashioned glass, exactly. Yeah. But it's a nail, an old fashioned nail, because new nails, well, they're all galvanized. Nobody's
going to steel. They're zinc.
Right.
All right.
All right. So I do have to make a disclaimer that we do not encourage or condone excessive drinking, and that we're not being paid by these companies that we are.
Be responsible with your consumption. Everything in moderation.
Absolutely. And stay
except
at home.
for guitars. Guitars, you should get more of them always.
Always more guitars. Never enough guitars. Right. All right, so we have some questions that I would like to start reading out because 15 minutes into the session. Let's take a look at the first one. I also see that there are some questions coming in live, and I will get to them once we've done these questions that we already have received. So first question is, what are some of the biggest challenges that have surfaced during the pandemic from the point of view of performance testing, and what safeguards should companies be putting in place to avoid disruptions now or in general in the future? wants to go first?
Well, I'll give a shout out
Mm-hmm.
to my colleague James Pulley, which some people might know, on a PerfBytes podcast called News of the Damned, which started just as something James and I did. It was really funny, and I got to change my voice and become Satan, which is always fun, and introduce him. But on the News of the Damned, actually, James even got on a local radio station in Florida. We're seeing a lot of websites crashing because the way society was working, the way human beings were working, certain kinds of things we didn't do as much online. You did them in person. Take, for instance, ordering food and deliveries and things like that. But also, there's stuff around schools, so extension learning or virtual classroom type stuff. Obviously, GoToMeeting, Zoom, and all the virtual meeting type of stuff. We're seeing a lot of crashes around that. James, in particular, was covering things around college websites as well as government websites that normally had what would be a very even level of load over a period of time because there wasn't a spike in any one behavior. Well, consider unemployment. Unfortunately, unemployment is crazy. And the process, if you ask anyone that's trying to get benefits or compensation, you have to go through multiple layers of approval and revalidation and application and all of this in order to figure out if you're eligible. Then once you're eligible, then you need to figure out how to get signed up so that the benefits can flow to you. And a lot of those websites were really built to be very, very evenly used over time because there was no particular spike in, let's say, unemployment. And so but the nature of those websites crashing is nothing new. It's simply the fact that the human workload, the human behavior around society changed dramatically. And of course, those websites that once appropriately were like, well, we don't really need to scale. I mean, nobody really knew. All of a sudden, whoa, wait a minute, we need to do that. So I would say that the biggest issue we see is not that certain, obviously, websites are going to crash because they've never been under this kind of load, and those are all the normal reasons. But there was this thing we invented as an industry, maybe I'll say 15 years ago or more, which is the elasticity of a system. I mean, the idea that you have a load balancer that can sort of auto add or auto apply resources. Scaling out became highly automated. And the ability to scale something out. And then, of course, maybe 10 years ago, we're seeing more of these like Docker containers and Kubernetes and container type infrastructures that can scale out even within the platform. So you have both the platform as a service that's elastic, the networking that's elastic, the global presence of the cloud can be elastic. So that's the main thing I think that people would learn from this is even if they don't tune up their website or tune up their database or their applications, they're now seeing that, hey, how fast can society change? We used to think society was fairly stable forever, and then you could place your bets or go into business and operate very efficiently and cost effectively. And I think people are really missing out on the idea of elasticity. The biggest one probably being this content delivery network, services like Akamai. You can roll your own. There's usually ISPs. Sometimes they have their own kind of built-in CDN content delivery network. Content delivery networks are sort of a static but elastic in the way it moves your traffic around automatically for you. It expands for you in an automated way as a service. So that's probably the number one thing that a lot of these sites during the pandemic, not so much to do with lockdown or kind of the social distancing part. I can see that there's probably a tremendous change within mobile traffic usage. People that were once I know people that don't even have a home computer system. Not me, of course. I'm a geek, so I have tons of computers around the house. But there's some people that even were like, I go to the office to do my job, and when I go home, I don't have a house with all this stuff and everything. I have, a laptop or a mobile device, and a lot of them are actually working over a hotspot on a mobile tether to their device. I know in our company, there's a bunch of people that are doing that. And so there's some changes in the infrastructure that way as well. But I think the concept of elasticity architecturally is probably the one thing that people will now go, it's pretty cheap to do it. We should probably just flip the switch and make sure we have a CDN and we can do some scale out. Probably that's going to have a long-term lasting effect. I don't know. What do you think, Adam? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not as knowledgeable in performance based. In all full disclaimer, I mean, some of the things that I think I've seen being sort of a consumer of data and user of applications, that you've also had applications having to be spun on the fly. So, like for example, the PPP application comes out, which we actually, as a company, applied for, and so every bank suddenly had to build up a new application system for a completely brand new business process overnight. That didn't exist, that the government hadn't even finalized the rules for, and when they were changing constantly. So and many banks, like my bank, I won't mention their name, but they're a really good bank, and they were able to basically build an entire application process online that you uploaded documents to. So things like Google Forms, Google Sheets, and other workflow management systems have allowed people to roll their own business processes and roll it out to people in the internet in potentially days. And then when the business process changes, because the government's still changing its mind or changing the law and the laws are changing, they can change it. I mean, think about that. Then you look at something like the unemployment insurance, to use your example, written in COBOL. Imagine you have to change that on the fly. Well, you got to find COBOL programmers. You got to potentially fly them in because they probably don't have VPN. I don't know if they have access to these systems. So the problem is, it's not only the elasticity of scaling of the technical infrastructure, you have to scale the ability to create new processes on the fly because things are changing rapidly. And then they change the unemployment insurance. They change the fact that you're going to be getting extended insurance. And in Europe, they have the furlough schemes. So the world had to invent entire new business models for HR and unemployment, and how companies would be able to compensate people and how businesses would get compensated. And suddenly, this new business is invented overnight.
What do you think, Adam? Sorry, I had another puppy's here. Hi,
no problem.
Sweetie Pie. That's fine. She's going to say hello. Adam, an interesting thing about that, this is Amber, everyone, by the way.
Hello.
Hi, cutie. Interesting thing, Adam, one idea being that when people would use, say, Google Sheets, I think a lot of IT departments, when they roll out a new business process with new policies and, of course, a new application to do it electronically, there's still a tremendous amount of money spent on security. And I think some of the fear would be, well, we kind of threw it together, and security's hard. Performance is hard, to get right. But I think there's some people that are going to have, like with PPP, really quick wins that are like, oh, that worked. And it's pretty secure.
Right.
Why do I have an IT department? I could go to a no-ops model. I could start. I think people still need to validate these things to make sure they're doing the right stuff. I'm not. It's just a different model. But there could be things from an infrastructure perspective that people are like really enjoying the fact that they launched it in Google Sheets and it worked.
And it worked, and users had access to it, and Google has multi-factor authentication baked in. So I have two thoughts about that one. Actually, an interesting question, because we as a company moved to Google Apps about 6-7 months ago, maybe not 9 months ago. And initially, I was one of the, and I was one of the people who said, "Oh, do we have to do it right now? It doesn't generate revenue for us. Our old email system was crappy, but kind of worked. And what's the benefit?" And we launched it all. It was good. And now I am so glad that we have it, because it's been so much more secure with multi-factor authentication, and everyone can access it. We can share documents versus what we had before with network drives and VPNs. And so moving to the cloud for our email and sort of business apps, it's really helped us. And then the second thing is our customers who use our test management requirements management tool. We had some customers that were using on-premise. They're like, no, we don't want your cloud service. We kind of like it. We know why you have it, but it's not for us. And then about 3 months ago, they're like, if we wanted to migrate to your cloud right away, could we? We're like, sure, it's the same system. And we did that, like emergency speed. Some people were like, when can we get onto the cloud? Because our users are now all at home, and our VPN doesn't allow them access to our corporate systems very easily from home. So we need to put it to the cloud. And it was like 2 years of like saying, no, this is not allowed, undone in probably a week. So I've seen both sides of that, both internally and sort of externally coming in. Awesome. The other thing that's interesting, I was just thinking what you said about cell phones. I wonder if people are using Wi-Fi might be more than they've ever used Wi-Fi before, but maybe data networks less. Because usually I was on travel, going to conferences, I'd always use my phone for everything. I'd be doing everything on data. My phone hasn't probably left my house, or my, for the most part, in months. So data networks potentially have become less important.
Well, somebody who does not, somebody that's actually using a data service on a phone probably has marvelous performance because there's such fewer number of people on the actual cellular connection
because everyone's at home on their Wi-Fi, right?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point as well.
I hadn't thought of that. It just occurred to it. One thing we also have found with some employees who are in very rural areas, and they could live in these very rural areas, and they had terrible internet because they would come to the office, so they didn't need it much except for the evenings. And now they are working from home, so they really struggle. So there's become this sort of have and have-nots, this tierization of society. If you live in a very rural area and you're relying on some terrible satellite internet, you're going to have to either decide, do you pay to upgrade that, or does someone upgrade that, or you're going to have to move, because if this is the way the workforce of the future is going to be, those rural areas will become uneconomic.
I tell you, the other thing is in like an open source, like open internet kind of force. If right now you have I have a huge house with like an awesome Wi-Fi system, and it's a Unify system, by the way. I don't know if you know, Troy Hunt is like this great security InfoSec guy, and he started working with Unify. So I'm like, I'll hook up and get some of that stuff. But I think everyone should just open up their internet Wi-Fi at their house and basically make sure everyone has Wi-Fi everywhere. With just open up the passwords, just forget it. Or
guest
set
network,
up
or even guest network. Or
you could do secure your own stuff. Do a guest network, but open up a completely open guest network, and just
I like that sharing economy in work. This is what we were trying to do with Uber before it got messy.
And then some tinfoil hat wearing neighbor launches the DDS to attack against someone, and from your guest Wi-Fi, and then
my neighbors are not that tech savvy.
Let's toast to the tinfoil hat wearing neighbor. Cheers to you, my friend.
Someone's going to spoil it. That's the problem, right? It just takes one idiot to spoil good things. Because I agree with you. We should do that. But yeah,
there's always a troll underneath the bridge.
Yes, indeed. Okay, we have so much ground to cover. I have to introduce another topic, and this topic is on everybody's mind, especially now, moving on to all these digital things everywhere. And the topic is artificial intelligence. And the question would be, is there place and space for AI in performance testing? And I would like to ask Mark to start us on this topic, because he is the guru of performance testing. Tell us what you think.
Well, first of all, how do you know that I'm real right now? I am just zeros and ones floating over the internet to everyone. I could be artificial. So I'll just let that sink in for a minute. No, I'm kidding.
I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking Matrix, all this,
It is.
I'm an
right.
80s child.
All you see are the green squigglies going up and down the one. I think there's some tremendous stuff. I follow the Pink Lion. You remember in Boston with Jen, and then also Jason Arbin, who does I think Test.ai. They're some of the lead people that I kind of follow in the testing space, but also in the greater general space for artificial intelligence. The other company I follow is Dynatrace from the APM space, because they have some interesting AI pieces, and a lot of it are solving problems for pattern recognition, which is really, really important in performance testing, because a lot of the patterns are exactly the same. CPU hits 100%, exceptions do this, so you can map these correlated metrics and look for patterns within those correlated metrics. And usually that's a known anomaly for some kind of bottleneck. N number of database calls per one user transaction. Okay, so I've got some sort of redundant or N+1 problem happening there. I've got a garbage collection issue where there's a linear relationship or an exponential relationship between over-disposing or garbage collection overhead. And there's a couple cool companies that are doing things around that. So I think there's two camps that I see in performance for AI working in performance. And one camp is the profiling detection camp, also the monitoring results, go through and look for correlations in the chaos and look for patterns and that kind of stuff. Large like logging systems. So if you see Splunk or really large Elasticsearch, grepping through logs is the way of the old. The way of the new will be, having AI look for patterns and pattern recognition. The other place we see AI, and this may be relevant to Inflectra's world as well, is looking a little bit at test case generation. And that's using AI to look at maybe even real production telemetry, usage statistics, logging, maybe a real user monitoring information, and sort of generating automatically a bunch of test cases, every possible known case or use of a given set of controls or access points or versions, matrix upon matrix upon matrix upon matrix for test design and test matrix. And there's a couple different companies out there that are working on that. So those are kind of the two areas. I have to say for performance, in the first camp, I'm totally excited because that's really one of the most cumbersome parts of doing performance analysis, is wading through mounds and terabytes worth of data and logs. And if you go in just blind and not knowing what you're looking for, you'll get lost. So that's where kind of the expertise of performance experience, doesn't have to be a performance tester, engineer, it could be an infrastructure person, database person, whatever. They bring their experience to say, well, I kind of know what I'm looking for in terms of anomalies. Or they'll latch on to one metric and then go, this is interesting, and then they'll peel away the layers of the onion. But the test case AI generation piece, I don't think is as relevant for performance testing. It's great for security testing. It's great for functional testing, usability testing. But in the performance testing world, we're kind of always taking the top 5 most frequent, most sensitive. We kind of have a narrower scope. The one report that happens once a quarter, and maybe it sucks, but really business isn't going to suffer for the other 89 days of the quarter. We don't usually test for that one kind of thing, unless somebody says thou shalt test that, and then you go and do it. So I think there's not much benefit really in terms of automated test case generation. I see much more in the performance world around sort of monitoring, analysis, automatic pattern recognition kind of stuff. That's what I think.
What do you think?
And I think you hit the nail on the head there with the see with the performance, because like the login page has to work every time, because that's the gateway. Like I think it was an unnamed educational provider that sounds like something you have in a school that you write on. That company, his login page in Virginia didn't work. The fact the rest of the app worked, but the rest of the app performs brilliantly, but the login doesn't.
Yeah. The rest of the app performs brilliantly when no one can log in. No one's doing those other things.
Oh yeah. But leaving them aside, on our space, we've been using AI on the not just test case generation on the functional side, but actually on the test maintenance side, looking for patterns so that when a test changes, when the app changes and the test fails, did the test fail because the app changed because it was in a cloud update this month, or did the test fail because the app's broken this month? And so knowing that. And that's hard. That's a hard problem to solve. When you have to look at each application and look at every month, what did they do previously, and is this change similar to the kinds of changes they've made, or is it an anomaly and therefore it is broken? So it's looking at trend analysis. And if you're looking at, say, one cloud platform like MS Dynamics CRM, and you look at Salesforce, well, they're different apps. You can't take the data from one. You have to learn the specific cadence of that app. The other one, the performance that made me think of was business metrics. Could you have AI monitor business metrics and be able to determine there's something going on before even the technical stuff? So perhaps your monitoring is you're doing all this monitoring, but you're not looking at certain things. But you have all these business metrics coming in, like number of orders, number of support reps. Suddenly, everyone's calling the support desk, and in an anomalous way, maybe your help desk went down, or is not, the load is not there. So you could be using some kind of business metric monitoring and pattern matching on there too.
Yeah. We do see this with outages in the security space because, like, for instance, I think many, many years ago, Target, U.S. retailer here in the States, Target, they had like some security compromised on, I think, their point of sale.
Yeah, the terminals.
Something like that. And then but it caused a performance problem because everyone started going to the website to figure out, hey, did I get hacked? And it was really before, I think, society. I think it was the two that stick in my mind are Home Depot and Target here in the US that finally woke us up to the idea, oh, I really do want a smart chip on my credit card. And then
that was the one. Yeah,
took 3 years. Yeah. But Target was one of those where all of a sudden the support website goes down, and then the IVR system for calling in went down. And of course, then the people problem of that is they didn't have even humans to respond and start taking care of these things. And so then there's a couple different people. In fact, I think Jen from Pink Lion used to be a Target employee. I don't know if she was there. I don't think she was responsible for security that way. But yeah, I mean, there's people that were like, it changed the whole company's perspective about how to do good security and response to security issues that I think we take for granted now. Nowadays, yeah.
Yeah, I remember Target was the one. Yeah, that was the one that ended Magnetic Stripes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Pretty much.
Thank you. That was really interesting. And I think we are ready now to move on to a third question. We have a question from Arlene. Arlene is a frequent participant here. Hi, Arlene.
Hi, Arlene. Good to see you.
Our question is, in your opinion, is software becoming more or less human friendly? What's your take on that?
Do you want me to go first this time?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I'll give Mark a break. I would like to think software is becoming more human friendly. Let me think. So first of all, I think because we're so used to really good consumer grade applications, definitely the days where you could write some terrible power builder application for your employees and make them use it, and it was like some horrible grid upon grid upon grid is gone. I mean, we all and certainly, like, if you look at some of the tools in our space in testing and test management and requirements tracking, there are a lot of tools that I look back at now and I install versions. I go, my God, how would we ever use these things? They're so unfriendly, and yet that was what was expected. And now everyone's used to business B2B apps being very, very similar in terms of usability to a consumer app. I think we've been conditioned to that because of people like Apple and Google, and I mean, Google's G Suites, I think, was one, really redefined usability in the business space. I mean, compared to some of the other productivity apps of the period, and I think that just changed the landscape for all of us. So I think that's made things much more usable. On the negative side, I guess, as we start to build more systems for APIs and more machine to machine, maybe the human is not the only customer. So that may be the other thing, is that maybe us humans are not, we are only some of the consumers of our apps. A lot of apps are built for APIs, and then those are machine-based. A REST API or a GraphQL API, that's an application now. There's no UI. But and the other thing I would say that's made it become worse is poor automated testers. Automated testers in the functional space, at least, I think have had it worse, because in the old days you had a tool like, it's a competitor of ours, but UFT, and for all the expense and the problems of UFT, a business functional user could take it and build some, reasonably good, maybe throwaway, but could do some business with some automation. And now we give them Selenium, and they're forced to basically hit F12 on the browser and learn programming and learn XPath and learn CSS and become machines. So I think that's become less usable.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. If I think about it in very mechanical ways, as you just pointed it out, accessibility, I would give us a plus. We've come a long ways in terms of accessibility since some of the first, I want to say it's the 508 compliance stuff and some of the other things many years ago, ADA compliance and things like that. And I think as we've morphed the user interface or the UX design into mobility and wearables. By the way, these are normal glasses, or not funky glasses, but other wearables. I mean, I have a full-on computer on my wrist and figuring that out. I think we've had to think about human factors much more. So I think I'd give us a +1 accessibility wise. But if I think more holistically around being human friendly, like building communities around technology, around computing, that's more human friendly, I think I maybe give us a -1. +1, maybe I'll give us a -1. I'd give us like a +1 for building the ability to have digital communities that are human friendly, society friendly, but then not managing and governing them, I'd give us like a -2. So, and I can remember, like old guys, way back to bulletin boards and early forums, everyone knows the difference between, do I want the tinfoil wearing neighbor hat unmoderated forum where it just gets annoying and tears it's disappointing, it's misinformation, it's that, or do I want to go someplace that's moderated, meaning there's some peer review built into this, and we moderate the information within that digitally. So I'd give us a -1 to some extent in terms of sort of ethical, socially responsible tech in the world. I think we have a much more to do there. I'd give us a +2, I wrote down, for environmentally, because we've translated a lot of stuff into very efficient battery use. A lot of the cloud computing has taken inefficient on-premise and moved it to hydroelectric power, geothermal power, highly efficient. I mean, if you think about what the chip manufacturers have done and the consolidation into very large data centers that are using solar and geothermal and all these other more cleaner types of energy, I think we're leaning in a much more environmental way, where technology, had we not had those innovations, we'd have been sucking up all the power and heating up the planet 10 times more. So I'm not an expert in that, but I'm going to lean towards thinking, boy, we've done a pretty good job of saying we don't have a data center on. I haven't worked at a company that had a data center on premise in a decade. They're all like maybe a test lab for like weird stuff, but not main production. It's all somewhere else in another machine in a much more efficient cooling, efficient power kind of thing. And then like battery life, I charge this thing maybe once every 2-3 days, depending on the app. If I put an app on there and then I uninstall it if it sucks.
Or if you have a 6-year-old who plays with your phone all the time.
Yeah, exactly. So I think human friendly wise, that's kind of how I would rank it, from being very mechanical about the actual human factors to sort of thinking about society. And
it makes me feel good about humanity now.
Well, there's one negative. I just thought you made me think of one negative I just want to throw back, which is that, I hate to say old people, but people who didn't grow up with this, because one of the things my parents have found is that on the plus side, before the pandemic came, they were resisting getting a phone or an iPad, and they had some terrible old phone that was awful. I went to Britain last year and I made them buy an iPad and made them both buy iPhones. And on the plus side, they said, thank you for doing that, because now we can stay in touch with all our family relatives, and if we didn't, we wouldn't have known how to do that and set it all up. But the negative is, that's the problem. For many people who didn't grow up with this technology, society is not making it easy for people who are older, didn't grow up with phones, and then we're taking away, like, it's an emergency. The payphones have all gone. A lot of the infrastructure that used to be there is gone. The public infrastructure is gone. We're relying on private infrastructure to replace all of that, and it's not regulated. And if people didn't grow up with this, a lot of older people will just literally be shut out of the entire economy and society. Like voting, or basic core citizenship activities are being outsourced to the private world. And a parking vendor went bankrupt on Monday, and luckily we had a second vendor here. But suddenly, every city, I think in parts of Pennsylvania, you can't park anymore until they get a new vendor.
Yeah.
Mobile now.
And the idea being also, then I think you're right. There's a generational bias where we don't make non-techies or non-native techies, I'll say. People that didn't natively grow up with that in their life from birth. It's a challenge. We don't make it as easy as I think we could or should. Yeah.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. You are going into such depth, and I love it, but we have to move on. We have a few more questions coming in live. I have a question from Allison, who is asking a very precise question, so to say. It's not about AI ruling our lives. How did you incorporate a separate test server with a continuous integration server? Any takers with that one? Who wants to go first?
I'll go. And thank you. You had mentioned this one before. I think she submitted it. So to Allison, I think there's at the very, very beginning of doing sort of continuous integration, continuous delivery, there weren't many options. There weren't many ways. In fact, a lot of the pipeline, like if you take a Jenkins, Bamboo, the Team City or Team City Foundation server kind of stuff. If you take that now and you rewind it by 10, 15 years, you didn't have a lot of options. You had to really build all that stuff yourself. And back then, at the beginning of continuous delivery, let's say 15 years ago or so, there were two models. One, development had the pipeline, and they did continuous integration in development. And the model for adding a test server was the good old, hey, push this to QA, and QA hadn't become automated. Performance, even less so, right? We were just suffering in the corner as they took away our hardware. That's fine. But nowadays, you have much more sophisticated pipeline management, pipeline automation. So you have a couple different options. Three that I see more prevalent and I use right now. One is just your straight cascading. I push it to dev, I run tests in dev, I get a feedback, then I push it to the next level of test, I get the feedback. If that looks good, I go to the third level of test, and then it comes back. Maybe after that all looks fairly green or green enough, then it gets automatically pushed to, say, an integration environment or like a security testing, and then maybe it comes to performance. It can be as large, scaled, if you think of it as steps going through, more rigorous testing, more rigorous testing, more rigorous testing. And a lot of, like Jenkins, that we do it with Team City, you can pre-set up those environments. So you can have them sort of, I would say, static environments where you're always pushing to QA Lab 1. QA Lab 1 always has, the initial QA pass for automation. QA Lab 2 is a little bit more rigorous because we have more data and more other. Then maybe QA Lab 3 is the full end-to-end business process that's automated, and that kind of stuff. But you can have the same old permanent labs set up and then just keep pushing the pipeline into those. If you want to add a test server into that, if let's say you have development and you have a test server, you're adding another, not just a server, but you're adding a step in the pipeline. And you have to figure out at what point do I want to go do this kind of testing. Like, you may not want to do full end-to-end testing first. You might want get these unit tests run, then do some early security testing, and then do just navigation testing, or maybe some small integration tests to make sure the microservices are talking to each other and make sure that works. And so when you're thinking about adding not just a test server, think about what kinds of tests are appropriate, what kind of learning you want to do at that step in the pipeline, and who's going to do something with those test results. So if your primary customer is a developer, you want that test server to be instantiated and the tests to be run, just those tests that developer, what he or she might want to learn very, very early. Like, this thing I'm building does PCI payment processing. So I want to run the top 20 security tests and these kinds of data flow tests and validation tests first before I do anything else, because I don't want to push anything else until I know that this suite of maybe 15 things run. So then you figure out, all right, do I push that to a static lab on premise? Do I push that to a static test server in the cloud? Or do I do something more ephemeral where I actually have like Terraform or some of the other automated instantiations where Jenkins or Team City can call out to Azure or EC2 and say, hey, spin up a given server, push my release to that server and run these tests. And at the end, it maybe keeps it around for 24 hours or it tears it down and gives you the results. So thinking then, I know what kind of tests I want to run. I know when I want to run them. I know who the results are intended for and what we're learning. So now let's figure out, do I run it in an existing machine? Do I spin up a new machine in the cloud? Or do I even do like something completely ephemeral? And then where that test server would end up being best built. And then you can go to your infrastructure people and say, how do I make that happen? Who has the permissions? Can we plug it into Team City with an API and automatically does that for us? And that kind of stuff. But thankfully, it's not 15 years ago where you'd have to write all that automation yourself. Now you can kind of plug it right in. And I should give a shout out, Adam, to think about Inflectra in terms of sort of test case priority and kind of organizing the tests and what they're doing. Maybe you can give some comments on that.
Right. Actually, my thinking was a little bit twofold. And one is actually I'm going to give a shout out to Gene Godimer of Coveris, who I've attended one of his great talks. He has a great talk about test for your pipeline. So I'm going to. So Gene, this is from you. So I'm acknowledging where it came from. And what he talked about a lot, which is great because I'm not as skilled in performance, was the issue of people want to do perfection or they don't want to do it at all. It's like, well, if I can't do load testing every CI build, then I shouldn't do it. If I can't do an end-to-end load test with 1,000 VUs, then why bother? Let's just wait. And his idea was, no, can you do something simple? Maybe you just do it on your existing CI server, do 10 VUs, very simple, just do some basic analysis. And if you compare build over build, you would know if there's going to be a discrepancy. If every build took, 2 or 3 seconds to run the entire set of performance tests, and now it takes 5 or 6 seconds, it's not slow, but it's twice as long. Now you know when you start to move to those higher environments where you're going to have 100 VUs and do much more sophisticated load testing on engineering. Now you know whether to bother doing that, or at least it gives you an early warning. And the second one was a client of ours, Morrison's Supermarket. I'm going to give a shout out to them in the UK. And one of the challenges they've always had is that their production environment cannot be replicated. It's literally like mainframe, supply chain, I mean, it is incredible. And with the coronavirus, they've had to think about these things because it's being stressed like it's never been stressed before. And so what they realize is they can't replicate a dev environment, and they can't test in production some of these things because they only have so many mainframes. So they would scale it. They would say, if we'll set up a 10% replica environment of our production, it should run X% faster. If it doesn't, we know it will probably, based on our experience, not run as fast. So you can do things like you can set up a replica environment and or doing small micro tests early in the pipeline to inform it, which I think is similar to what Mark was saying. But those are the key things. And then we also do a lot of integration with our tools with performance testing and security testing, so that because people think of test management often as manual testing, they might tie in their unit tests, they might tie in automated functional tests. But what we tell people is, no, you should also be tying in your neo loads, thinking of like Neotis that you mentioned earlier, and also your security tests. Those should be tied into your test management tool and your pipeline because you want to have the reporting and the metrics.
Yeah, absolutely. But let me state that extrapolation is evil. Just to let you know. I mean, if you're extrapolating more than 10 times, then no one will believe you. But a couple 2 or 3x, I can believe 2 or 3x. It's like, we do one. Yeah, that's fine.
I think if you could replicate it inexpensively, you should always do that. That's better. I mean, with things like AWS and Azure, you certainly can. But Morrison's were dealing with major mainframes in a big old iron and stuff
that's costly to do for sure.
Yeah.
All right,
so
gentlemen.
I hope it helps.
We have 7 minutes on the hour, so we have one more question that came in line from Trish, and I would like to give her a chance to hear the answer to your question.
Hi, Trish.
Hi, Trish.
Hi, Trish. How does SLO metrics work with performance testing?
SLO or SLA?
SLO.
Oh, good question. Service level objectives.
Oh, okay.
Service level agreement implies you have a contract. We have an agreement. You're Adam. You are my partner in the supply chain and the whatever, and we put together a contract that legally says I will give you under N amount of load. I will give you N amount of response time, guaranteed, 5 nines kind of stuff. Service level objective says we need to be able to hit some target, even if there's no legal contract. And you can think of technically service contracts, right? The way those things work, or it's actually a legally binding contract for, hey, you will always give me this throughput, this capability, or different service levels. To me, a service level objective is nothing more than a test objective. I know for a given event, a given activity, a campaign, a launch of a product, selling tickets, serving unemployment applications during a pandemic, you may come up with any variation of scenario that say, I need to support a volume of use, meaning N number of users, N number of transactions, N number of events coming into my system, requests, messages, whatever they are, there's a volume of them. And I need that to happen within a specific time frame. So really the first 2 ingredients for any performance thinking is time and volume. Those are your 2 main things. Everything else can come second. CPU, disk, architecture, memory, what platforms, what storage, did we run in the cloud, did we run on premise, what's the latency, all of the other stuff that's happening in sort of the nuts and bolts of the machinery and the architecture comes second. But really, a service level objective should be crafted always around not just number of users, because I could say, yes, we can support 450 billion users, but they're all going to have 1 hour response time. That's probably not okay. So, and you can't just say, I need to have 50 millisecond response times. Yeah, but to the business, you might be like, if we got maybe 280,000 hits per second, and could we go to 100 millisecond response time? Because even if it slows down a little bit, we'll still be in business. We'll still, achieve our goals. So the business will always give in a little bit on, well, is it half a second, 1 second, 2 second response time? Could we put a waiting room in there and then measure, all right, a waiting room technology, I stayed in the waiting room for 30 seconds, a minute, and then it gave me some information while I'm waiting. Hey, you're next in line kind of thing. Queuing mechanisms, actually functionality. So I always say to someone like Trish, if you're putting together a service level objective, technically it could be very formally written. They're always there, even if they're not formally written. Somebody has an idea, N amount of things has to happen in N amount of time, X and Y, those time and volume. So analyzing those two things in your conversations as you're developing your requirements should connect. Just be aware, hey, do we have an SLO already formally defined by the IT infrastructure team of the thing of the blah, blah, blah? If then you just attach that to your story and say, here's a reference to a formal service level objective that has been defined by the company. And there could be somebody in the business development or program office that says, we are going to have 4x growth. We need a service level objective. And they are objectives. You might not meet them. You might exceed them. But different from a service level agreement, which I usually see enforced in production, 5 nines. It's sometimes even a legal contract. So I hope that helps explain SLOs versus SLAs.
Right. So Teo, what was the question related to them then?
So the question was worded this way: how does SLO metrics work with performance testing? I think the question here is about performance testing mostly.
Yeah. Within the answer, it's relevant within my answer to say your test objectives. That is your SLO. So if my test objective is to ramp up to 10,000 users and have less than 1 second response time, I've got a number of users and I've got a response time goal. Those objectives become performance testing goals. If you don't set those goals, Trish and I, if this is the same Trish, I think it is, we were talking about a couple different tools out there where they didn't really emphasize response time, but they just said, we can hit 400 and some requests per second. I'm like, that's great. What was the response time? I don't know. Always for performance testing, when you're doing, I have an objective. If you want to call it success, we succeeded in our load test. You always want to have both response time and volume combined within your definition, N number of users, N number of transactions, and this speed. Those are the two have to be combined. Again, you could say, I need to do both of those things, but not exceed 60% CPU. Like the CPU consumption or the database consumption comes later. The real goals for the business or the goals for doing your test almost always should start with time and volume.
Why do people fixate? Actually, that's interesting. It makes me think of a question. And actually, to the question that was asked, I think, Mark, there's nothing much I can really add to that. I think you did it perfectly. But your answer made me think of another question or answer, which is that we have clients come to us when they're using our tool, and they're like, well, we're using the tool, and the CPU is 80%. And we're like, okay, what else is on the box?
Great.
Nothing else. 100%. Like, that's actually what you want. I mean, if there's other things in the app and the app is slow and things are being bottlenecked and requests are hanging, that's a totally different story. But people will say the CPU is 100%, but everything's fast. How can we get the CPU percent down? I'm like, well, start another application up, or at least then our percent will go down, and the system will be slower. But I mean, it's like,
hey, you're not wasting any CPU. If you ever talk to a consolidation expert in the virtualization VMware salesperson, they'll say, oh, you have excess cycles here.
Right.
We could consolidate and save you in the conversion of the spreadsheet of the thing here, an ROI chart of the, they're going to sell against your excess capacity. And then you'll find out that you always like always good recommendation. You want to have some headroom.
Right.
So you don't want to run at 100% CPU, even though you add one more user or you add one more, somebody clicks a little faster, suddenly you're like, well, what's the rate of transactions? And if that equals 100% CPU, the next person that logs on may have a horrible experience. But that's where there was actually a podcast episode in PerfBytes and also Ask PerfBytes talking about ramping up, and I think Trisha's on that as well. Was the idea of why do I run a load test where I ramp up and then steady state in the load test? And the idea is exactly that, Adam. How do things look in a healthy state at 1, 2, 3 transactions, 3 users, 4 users, and at some point you start noticing that the CPU hits 100% CPU, but it's not my goal. My SLO is here to support 1,000 users. I only made it to 612, and I hit 100% CPU. So I went from healthy into unhealthy, but I'm able to see it because I slowly ramped up the load over time, where some of the other tools that are out there that say, your SLO is 1,000 users, boom, run 1,000 users. And I don't know if I failed at 1 or 999 users. I have to test kind of slowly ramping up. So go look for a PerfBytes, Ask PerfBytes episode. I think it's actually the first Ask PerfBytes episode. And Brian and I talk about why you do ramp ups. It's really good.
Do you ever push back on SLOs, or I mean, I guess, or but not so much SLOs, but SLOs, but where clients like a friend of mine who works for a consulting firm was working for a government agency, and they demanded that they have incredibly high throughput of hundreds of VUs and very, very, very high turnaround times, response times, and yet it was going to be a console, a physical kiosk app in a museum in DC, where most will be 30 people ever using it, things like that. And obviously with the coronavirus, we have had a situation where things are being used unexpectedly. But the cost to the government would have been astronomical if they had met that SLO. And actually, my friend's company actually pushed back and said, "Listen, we can do this. We know how to do this. It's not, we've got the capabilities here, but it's going to quadruple the cost of everything that you need, and we don't feel in good conscience this is the right solution for you."
Yeah.
Did that happen a lot, or?
Well, there are non-thinking people all over our industry, and so if you think critically about that, when I think about time and volume, what is a reasonable response time for, let's say, disk operations are like nanoseconds. What's a reasonable response time for a web service call? Maybe 100 milliseconds. What's a reasonable response time for a kiosk at a museum? 2 to 3 seconds. Okay, so the context for what is acceptable to an end user, or if that end user is a mechanical device, it may be much, much faster. Again, be very specific. Think critically about what's the context for the definition of that response time goal. And then also be equally critical about what are we talking about with the volume. In your case for your kiosk, there may have been maybe there's an account lookup or a program, the tour lookup. And that tour lookup is an API that downloads something. And the definition must be that back-end web service that pulls down the tour definition is used in all the museums all over the world. And so their response time, their goal is, we must support thousands and thousands of these. But your friends or your partner's company might come along and say, well, we're just really testing for this one
instance
museum.
Right.
And so let's adjust the context for volume to say, well, for all the museums in the world, it's 2,000 transactions per second. For this museum, it's 1 transaction for 15 minutes. And so sometimes I see with implementations, we have people who aren't testers, aren't critical, and IT is not their thing, but they have to do it. So they'll ask for give me a PDF, and the vendor sends them something, says, here's some, well, this is what I have to do. And they're like, did you read it? Yeah, I read it. You read the title or you read the name of the email.
And you gave the numbers directly to your vendor and said, implement this.
Yeah, and to get back to our question, I forget Arlene, was it, that asked about
Trisha.
Human.
Well, Trisha, but I mean, no, the human, are we being human friendly?
Yeah, that was Arlene, yes.
Well, in our ecosystem, we have people that just throw highly technical contextual documents around and expect normals to be able to, well, you know how to do this. And so then you end up in situations where facilitating and helping, being supportive of somebody to get really specific about let's talk about time. Let's talk about volume in a way that really makes sense for your business. And then build the requirements from that, and then get more specific from that. That's usually what I end up seeing.
Gentlemen, we're 5 minutes over.
Oh,
I have to be the bad cop, and I have to. We have answered all the questions of the people who sent the questions and were present. So cool. We are going to maybe save all the other questions for maybe later. But Great. It was wonderful to have you, Mark and Adam. Thank you for joining us. And everybody
and Amber.
Amber, yes. Shout out to Amber, who was so quiet and so lovely and so nice. Not interrupting, unlike some of the dogs I know.
There you go.
And thank you, gentlemen, and have a very, very, very nice long weekend. And hopefully Mark will connect soon. Maybe we'll see you at, our own Inflectracon or something like that. Hint, hint. So everybody have a great weekend. And
thank you, Taya, so much as well.
Thank you. Great to see you guys.
Bye.
Great seeing
you. Have a good
you.
weekend.
Bye.